Hello, all. This is our first narrated PowerPoint. I think this will work well for our class lectures, and I'll try to make them shorter because I know it's harder when we're not face to face to actually listen to um, a lecture or a talk without being able to respond. Um, this is something that I used when I taught an online class, and the students seemed to really like being able to have the move and move back and forth and listen to things that they wanted to hear again. So we'll try this week. We have this one PowerPoint, this one narrated PowerPoint. Um, we have an individual lab on Thursday, which you will create a clickbait article on your topic. So it's kind of fun using images and violating logic and just kind of creating something that you see that you know is sort of outrageous about your topic. Um, and I have two ratings for you to do in prep for that, in addition to this PowerPoint. Um, and I have a discussion board post asking you when and how you would like to correspond with me. Do you want to have open meetings where everybody can log in and we can see each other like Skype, but anyone who speaks, the camera will go to them and they can ask questions. Do you want to have individual meetings like we do when we conference? So if you'll respond to that for me, then I can proceed with how we want to conduct those kind of meetings. So today we're going to talk about rhetorical strategies and logical fallacies. If you've had a philosophy class or and sometimes in other composition classes, you've covered some of these things. We'll look at the individual lab that you'll do on Thursday, and then we'll look at that next major assignment, that pop article comparison that's due on 4/2. So you're writing a persuasive lit review. Um, it's not technically an argument paper, but you will have an argument piece to it. So, what do we mean by persuade? Um, we we will be taking that data that you're collecting now, that research that you're doing, and you will, in organizing it, in presenting it, in the discussion, present not only the summary of that data, but you will be showing the reader ways that you see that the research is applicable. That could be for clinicians, that could be for patients, how it's beneficial to general society. You will be pointing out weaknesses or gaps in the knowledge that still need to be fulfilled with additional research. So, very much those kinds of things you've been practicing already in the journal analysis, and then in the citation chain will continue. But now you'll be dealing with, multiple sources per smaller topic within your paper. Um, but it all builds together. We'll talk about writing an argument because part of that persuasiveness builds on the same kind of tools as a full argument paper. If you have to write one of those in another paper in another class, your task is to again take all of this research and research findings and data that you're researching, and synthesize it, present it in a clear way so that your reader gets the synopsis and the connections without having to do all of that work that you're doing in 16 weeks. They can do it by reading your paper. Your audience doesn't necessarily have to agree with you right away. They just have to consider that your argument and your data and your choices and your connections are valid, are potentially the leaning in the right direction as far as your conclusions and your applications. This is why knowing your audience is so important. Um, we've been talking about how this audience is an academic, educated, possibly research or practitioner group. So you're writing for that audience. At some point in the semester, the last couple things you will write will be geared towards your patients, your clients, and so you will be considering their perspective and what knowledge they have in writing for that audience. But even in the lab on Thursday, you will be writing for the general population, in your clickbait article. You must always consider there will be a group who is looking at your research and your argument from a hostile perspective, who are not agreeing with the facts or your analysis of the data. Um, those could even be as extreme as the people who still reject the MMR, has not a connection, has no research connection with autism, but they'll always be kind of hostile to that. Or just people who have a different perspective on the data. You always have a group that's supportive, who already leans your way, who already sees the data as suggesting what those applications or those um, uh, benefits to the research community or the practical community. The danger of the supportive group is that they may be using their own biases, their own um, agreement already, and your research is confirming that. This notion of confirmation bias is something we all fight. We already have sort of perspectives, regardless of how much knowledge we have about a topic, we lean certain ways. So even when you're reading the research articles and processing it, make sure that you're really interrogating the research for its logic, for its um, uh, presentation of data, um, so that you're just not confirming your bias. But it's that group that maybe this topic is new. Maybe they have been reading around in the literature, and so they're not set in their ways, that you have the strongest um, goal of reaching. Components of arguments, many of you may have covered these kind of topics before. Logic, I usually ask people in the class, like, what is logos? And that's your um, the logical argument that you make. It's how you connect things in a thoughtful um, um, way. Should be the basis of any argument paper. You have ethos. Most people who have heard of these things or studied these things know this as the appeal to the credentials um, of a source. And this is why we spend so much time looking at impact ratings and talking about research credentials and peer review, because what you choose to use as data um, builds this case of ethos. And you yourself, as a writer, by choosing those things and connecting those things with logos, are establishing your own ethos in the field or in a class or as a professional. Pathos is the appeal to emotion. It is very much uh, it, anecdotal or the use of case studies, and those are perfectly fine in the introduction or background, or sometimes even in the discussion section of an academic paper to show the human side of a problem, but it should not be the basis of your argument. And Karyos, I've added here, is the timeliness of your your data and your argument. So making sure that that data you're using is at the cutting edge, that even though you might have cited foundational research, you are using the most current understanding in the field, the most current analysis of that data. And in other forms of writing, you might use images or other ways that connect with your audience in a timely manner. So, logos again is that foundation of your argument. You're really trying to present a case in which your reader is considering the data very thoughtfully, and your organization of that data, your grouping of the research articles, the way that you talk about them, then bring out their similarities, their differences, their import. This is building your logos. You want to make sure that you are presenting a good argument, that you're not just trying to persuade using emotion, that you are using a logical, convincing argument. The two most common forms are deduction and induction. So we'll look at examples of those. Deduction is moving from a big topic, a general statement of fact, and then showing the data that support that fact. So something like all humans are mortal, Rick Deckard is a human, Rick Deckard is mortal. This is the standard Socrates argument for deduction. I use Rick Deckard, who comes from the movie Blade Runner from the 1980s, and then there's a recent one um, in the 2000 teens in which Rick Deckard is, or Harrison Ford, is chasing rogue robots. And the key question of both those movies is he really human or is he also one of the robots? Induction is now starting from the specifics, uh, specific observations, and then trying to get to a general claim. So you have something like Sam is a penguin. Sam happens to be colorblind. You might survey 1,000 penguins and find out how many, what percentage are colorblind themselves. Once you know that percentage, it's not going to be 100% probably. It's probably going to be maybe something like 85%. Then you come across another penguin and you can make the claim that that penguin is probably colorblind because the percentage claims it seems to suggest that the majority of penguins are colorblind. And so we're building a case from specifics to to a general claim. Um, this is something that case studies can do. If you have a case study that's interesting, or several case studies, or some anecdotal evidence, then you can move to collecting more data or present more data that seems to suggest that, and then you can logically move to a larger claim. So if we look at this argument, we have this advertisement for using radio to reach people. So we've got some percentages of uh, how much, what percentage of the population radio reaches. We've got a number of how many people that would be. And then we've also got some other data like 13 to hours a week, 2 hours a day. So this is very much building on a logical argument, logos. It's a building from data. So we're going from very specific data to the general fact that people could reach, send their message through radio. So we're going from small to large. So induction. Ethos, definitely the reason why you're citing and you're using citations to build your case, other people's research that have been proven sound by the research community through peer review and journal selection. To do this in your own writing, ways that you can build your own ethos is to use formal language. That's why I point out the use of academic verbs, not using conversational language when I'm looking at your papers. I say write in third person. Most of the time in your discussion, you can switch to first person. If it were your own research agenda, you can say we or I, find or found. That's perfectly fine, but avoid talking directly to the reader in statements like you should, everyone needs to. Plus, those are very much sort of moralistic statements. They're not built on ethos. Let the data speak for itself. Present it in a very factual, subjective way, or objective way, and so the reader is coming to that conclusion by the presentation of facts. You need to cite, and this is why we spend so much time doing this, because it builds this ethos, the second strongest part of your paper. And that for some, ethos may not convince the reader. There will always be research studies out there that suggest maybe contrary evidence, or is presented as there's a different cause, a different solution, and that's okay. That's how research, and we move closer to the truth, is through these points of contention. Now, let's look at an ethos argument that was made in my day and when I was a kid. Very much a common ad we would see in magazines and newspapers, even on television. More doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. Notice that the image here is a guy in a white coat. He appears to be a doctor, probably not, but they're appealing on that ethos that if doctors smoke, it surely can't be bad for you. We still have this kind of argument being made with things a little more benign. So we have the toothbrush, we have a number one choice of dentist, the guy in the lab coat below, probably not a dentist, but gives you the image, the illusion that he is a dentist, and we're relying on that ethos to do that claim for you. Um, Pathos, again, is this emotional side. So you often hear this in advertisement and in political speeches, but something like, if we do not solve the COVID-19 problem, all of our grandmothers could die, even though this is true that the virus affects elderly people more than young people. This is built on our emotion towards our grandmothers and not the data. So these are weaker arguments. Again, you can use them very circumspectly, carefully in your paper to show that human side, but they can undermine your logical ethos argument if used too much or inappropriately. Karyos is this using the right data at the right time, the right image, or that is relevant. So this is very much why we ask you to kind of look at the last 5 years of data, even though you might use a foundational source. But this is the timeliness of medical research is when was the data collected? What is our current state right now of knowledge, not older forms? So if we take an argument from history, like women's equality, it would look very different today than it started during the suffrage movements. So it took more than 100 years for women to get the right to vote. Obviously, that's not part of our argument anymore. However, anti-slavery was part of that original argument of suffrage, and we can still use that argument when we talk and move it slightly from slavery to sexual slavery or human trafficking. So Karyos using the right, I would say data, but we're going to use images for right now. There was a time when Avril Lavigne might have been the image you wanted to tie to your argument. Today it might look more like Billie Eilish. This is how relevant data is, and timeliness matters. So Kim Kardashian would be a good spokesman perhaps for something in People than she would in AARP, but at some point in time she may be the person for AARP. Again, this is Karyos is part of the reason you would change your tone, your data, your argument structure for something that you would argue with your boss about changing versus your mom versus a close friend. So again, all three uses of images, data, organization will depend on the audience. If we take some examples and we look at some ads, we can easily see how arguments are being made. In this case, we have this child, this baby, in a tire, and the claim is Michelin, because so much is riding on your tires. You can see that it's not about data of the tire, how long it lasts, stopping distance, anything like that. It's about, if you don't use this tire, you're putting your child at risk. Straight pathos. Here we have the same kind of argument. So we're talking about a very serious issue of domestic violence. And here the appeal is that even the dog suffers. And so some people would appreciate this pathos towards the dog more than they would the child. Here we see we have Jeff Daniels advertising beer, Taylor Swift Diet Coke, and Danny DeVito M&Ms. And so again, we're using a timeliness of image, of data to persuade people to use these products based on demographic information. But the connection is through this image of Hollywood. Let's look at some flawed reasoning, because in your clickbait, I want you to commit some of these in making the argument, so that if you're consciously creating them, you will more likely recognize them when you see them in other people's arguments. So, faulty sampling. If one of the most key issues with faulty sampling is not using enough human subjects to make your claim. This is a problem with This is a problem with second language acquisition research often that I was reading. It will take 6 Korean speakers that are learning English or 10 Spanish speakers who are learning Korean and make a generalization based on that. So oftentimes it is taking a very small sample size and making a general claim. Uh, in this article about concussions um, in football players. The critique about this is that the only human sample that they pulled studies from were people who actually played football. So they have no control group of people who didn't play football. They have no control group of people, or another comparison group of people who were sustained concussions through other ways. Um, I will give you this PowerPoint also just as a PowerPoint if you want to look at these links, because there's many links in here that we would have gone to in class, but make it impossible when I record the PowerPoint this way. So here the problem with the sample size is that it's totally based on the bias of only those who had played football. So this again is a faulty sampling problem. Another logical problem is overgeneralization. It kind of links to that small data sample size, but it could be used not just through sample size, but just insufficient data or just a claim in itself. When you start to use words like many, most, all, everyone, this means you're moving probably to making an overgeneralized claim. When some of you have done this in your papers at this point, I have kind of highlighted that and said, use the data, use what the percentages are. Don't make these claims because people can fault you for false cause. Again, this is a problem where people take the data and they automatically assume that they know the cause uh, or that they cite the wrong cause. But more often than not, we can only show correlation because the data is not conclusive. And so we can show that things correlate with each other, that they're related, but that we can't necessarily make the strong claim that A causes B. Um, Hasty generalization or stereotyping is kind of built on making a claim that, say, the behaviors or the characteristics of a group is the cause of a problem, and that's built on bias or stereotyping rather than on data. And then ad hominem, you won't really see ad hominem attacks in research papers. Um, it's more of in a political speeches where people, instead of taking apart someone's argument, they just attack the person for being the person, some kind of flaw in the actual person. So um, you can watch some humorous examples of that. Democratic fallacy is one that you often use as a child. Everybody's got an iPhone. Why I should get an iPhone, or everyone has this sneaker, so I should get a sneaker. But this does occur where people take the majority percentage and then make a claim that may not actually apply to the majority. Slippery slope starts out where the logic seems to follow, where there's a logical presentation of data, but the conclusion, when we really trace back, the conclusion gets so far away from what the actual um, data show that it becomes a little bit oftentimes illogical or um, in, incomprehensible. So these are the slippery slope are the example here. If you watch it, is very funny, but you will kind of see this in the clickbait articles where people will make this general claim that just because broccoli or avocados have been shown to be high in these vitamins, that somehow they're the cure-all um, for uh, a disease or a cure for something. And red herring, be careful that people don't bring in arguments, or you don't bring in arguments that aren't relevant to your actual topic. So there might be some tangential research out there that's not really related to your topic, and you try to make a claim and a connection that doesn't exactly exist. These are distracting arguments. Your goal as the writer is to just present the data and your analysis of that data in a logical, well-supported manner, which people consider to be possibly a correct reading of that data, and know that not everyone will accept that. For your homework for Thursday, before you do the individual lab, there's a couple readings. Make sure you understand ethos, pathos, logos, karyos. Make sure that you have some logical fallacies that you understand that you can use in that clickbait article. Make the clickbait article funny. Use images that are a little outrageous. This is allowing you to be a little creative with your topic and violate some of these things so that you recognize them. Here's the actual criteria for the lab. It was going to be in your alpha groups. It's now individual, so you'll see I've changed that on the actual website. So individually create a medical clickbait article using your topic, use images, appeal to ethos, so use a study, but distort that study like a lot of them do. Use a lot of pathos, use images that are spokespeople that are extreme. Um, it's worth 20 points. You have, I give you some points for creativity. I think that you should try to push the boundaries there. An appealing title, because clickbait has titles that try to get you into the article. Misuse of ethos, faulty logic, level of pathos, how emotional is your article. I will look at the technical mastery of grammar, punctuation, and citation. Those should all be accurate. One post for everyone. And then I will choose the best 3 to get one of those get out of jail free cards to use. It's due at the end of the day, Thursday. So make sure you post by then. Our next assignment is the pop article comparison. You will choose a medical article from a magazine like Time, Newsweek, Wall Street Journal, Men's Health, something like that cites a study. I'm hoping you'll find one that's related to, if not on your topic, and you will look up that study and you will do a comparison about how they're organized, their use of logos, ethos, pathos. Some will be very spot on and very good for the audience. Some will just have some distortion or some scientific accommodation in there, and you'll point those out. If we look at, here's just the middle section of the handout posted on Blackboard on that assignment, but you'll have an introduction. You'll formally introduce those 2 articles, where they occur, what they're about. You'll have a thesis statement. You'll have a background section that kind of summarizes the 2 articles and maybe establishes the topic, the medical topic, or the topic that they're discussing. Then you're going to really, in the body, compare the differences in their style, organization, and word choice, possibly the use of images, but more likely it will be the way that they use the evidence, the language that they choose. This is sort of like the results section of a research article, where you will just describe the data, and then in the analysis you'll kind of explain why you think the researchers or the writers chose these different strategies, and then you'll discuss how this could be a problem, or how this is beneficial to the different audiences, or if one distorts facts or causes logical arguments, and then you'll make a final statement in your discussion section about the ethical use of data and argument of both. I've asked you also to respond to a DB post on how we can have Zoom meetings that will actually be beneficial to you. Do you want to have class meetings on a certain day and time? Do you want to have individual meetings like we did in the conferences? What works for you? How do we want to do this? How do we want to set this up so we still have some face-to-face time in this period? Because this while this is scheduled to last till April 5th, this may be the mode of instruction for the entire semester. We just have to wait it out and see. So I hope you're doing well. I hope everyone's staying well, and we will figure this out together. So don't worry so much about. Um, this is a common way to do English 300. So we will use the technology to help us. All right. So I'm going to end now.